Good evening. My name is Rick Marsh. I've been asked to speak on Alberta's energy future. Can't really talk about Canada's energy future because our jurisdiction ends at the borders. I'm a geologist by degree, and I've been employed by the ERCB AER since 1979, actually. So I will date myself. And I have a lot of information for you, but if you just stay awake long enough to see the big arrows at the end of the graphs, that'll give you an indication of where we think things are these days. So I'm going to start with a little background, speak about going backwards before we go forwards, talked about the next 10 years and maybe a little beyond that, and finish with some things happening outside our borders. ST98 is the AER's annual reserves and supply demand outlook. ST98 2013 was the board's or the regulator's 52nd annual oil and gas reserves report. So we've been at this for a while, and about a decade ago we added the supply demand on an annual basis with the intent of giving people some information, giving Albertans information. It's up on our website. It's free. It's an annual publication. We have the old publications back to 2001. And if you are involved in energy development in this province in any shape, I strongly encourage you to take a look at this publication. It tells you what's happened in energy production, what the current reserve situation and what our supply and demand on a go-forward basis is. It is a wealth of information, and there's a lot of us in the organization that spend our time trying to generate these best numbers as possible so that you, as Albertans, have a source of information that you can make decisions on. We feel that better decisions come from better information. This is just a schematic of Western Canada showing the endowment. In Saskatchewan, you've got mainly oil. In BC, you got mainly gas, showing in red. And in Alberta, we have it all. We have predominantly a gas-prone province with significant oil and huge oil sands deposits. Most of Canada's coal is in Western Canada. Most of that coal is also in Alberta. So we're going to go back a little bit, talk about production before we start going forward. This is oil sands or bitumen production from in situ in the lower side and mineable in the upper side. And you will note the big arrows going upwards. Our production has increased significantly in recent years. And 2012 was the first year that in situ production was greater than mineable oil sands, and we see that on a go-forward basis. Oil and gas and coal, somewhat the other story. You can see here, oil is in the lower left, gas in upper right. Oil is coming from 1944, gas from 1964, and you can see that we're on decline. On both of those commodities, we're on decline because we're in a maturing basin. You will note, however, we've got a little blip here, a little increase in oil production. Given that that's the standard profile you'd see in resource development, this is an indication that perhaps something else other than conventional oil is going on. On the coal side, you can see that it is also decreasing in recent years, but that's not from an abundance perspective because there's lots of coal. That's more from a change in the marketing. So I just want to talk quickly about reserves for these commodities, just so you have an understanding of what the province has been looking at through the last few decades on our way to looking through the next decade. So this is our gas reserves in red, and you can see that we are on decline since 1982. And our reserves picture has fallen a little even more in recent years, mainly because of sustained low gas prices, not so much as related to the basin. But you will see that there's a blue line on that graph, and that blue line is basically the difference between what we extract from production on an annual year and what we add as reserves on the other side. And you will note that for the last several decades, that line averages below zero, which means that we are pulling out more than we're putting into our storage tank. So on gas, we're on decline. Comes to oil, same thing. We peaked in 1969. Most of the conventional oil out there has already been produced, although we haven't found all the oil that is yet to be found. We have, over the last number of years, about a 4% decrease on an annual basis, which is sort of showing the maturity of the basin. We're using up more and more of the material. But then recently, we have this little uptick. And we see that coming from something other than our conventional oil supplies. You'll also note that the little blue line, still below zero, but is trending upwards, and even more so in recent years. So there is some possibilities that the conventional side of our oil production is being augmented, and maybe even more so in the future, by an unconventional side. Most of that uptick that you're seeing there is a result of sustained higher prices, the use of, or the reuse of old existing technology in new ways, and a stable environment of which to do business. For oil sands or bitumen or coal, the official designation is lots. The province has abundant coal and abundant oil sands resources. The quality of these resources are world-class. They rank with any deposit anywhere in the world. There is a substantial amount of material there. The question is the difference between that which is in the ground and that which is going to come out of the ground by commercial operations. And we have some experience in that on the oil sands side, and that probably gives us some clues in terms of the unconventional oil and gas side, how that might play itself out as well. The short-term depletion of those commodities is not the issue. I'm going to show you some slides from ST98, which I know you're going to run out onto the website and go look up this very night because it's so fascinating. I will tell you, though, we have tried to keep its technical accuracy in line, but we have, over the last couple of years, actually tried to make it a little more readable for a general audience. So you'll probably get a few good pages in there before you fall asleep, and maybe over the course of a few weeks, months, years, you'll get through a lot of that material. The future will be what the future will be. The people in this room will help determine what that future will be. But we've done an analysis of what's gone before and what's coming ahead based on our knowledge of the resource, having an understanding of the cost of developing this material. And so we've put forward in this report what we would consider as a reasonable and a relatively fairly neutral view of what we think commodities are going to be doing in the next 10 years. So this is figure number 1 in the report. What we've done is taken the volumes of the material and converted that to heating content. So that's why the scale is in petajoules as opposed to barrels or cubic meters or anything else. But it allows all the commodities to be on the same scale. And in here we have coal, light and medium oil, heavy oil, bitumen, natural gas, coal bed methane, natural gas liquids, and the top line is the hydro and the renewable part at this moment. You'll notice our view going forward is going to be, the next 10 years is going to be similar to the past 10 years. In that, we're going to have increasing bitumen production and decreasing natural gas, predominantly conventional natural gas. Some of the uptick in the oil that you saw, we're still tracking on that, but we don't yet have the confidence that on a long-term basis, we're going to see large conventional oil supplies on a go-forward basis. We understand that that may well be the case, but at this point, we don't have the confidence to say for a long period, out 10 years, that it's going to have a significant impact on what Alberta produces in year 10. It may well be, but again, the future will be what the future will be. So the previous slide is what we produce. This next slide goes to show what Alberta will be using and what we'll be needing. So we anticipate coal being the same. We anticipate oil, and for the most part, bitumen also being at about the same level. And we're seeing an increase in the domestic use for natural gas and for natural gas liquids. The natural gas we would see as being used in an increasing method to remove the oil sands or the bitumen from the ground. And the NGLs, we would see that as increasing a little bit for our petrochemical industries in the province, but mainly through imports, because we don't have enough of that material for pipelining bitumen. So if you take what we produce, take what we need, the leftover material is the material that we can export. Actually can leave the province. Alberta doesn't export. My apologies, I made a mistake. We don't export to Ontario, we don't export to BC, those Canadian provinces. We send the material there. And Alberta doesn't export to the United States, Canada does. So that's why the term is removals, because it leaves the province. So in this case, again, we're seeing some of the oil available for export. It may be a larger proportion that we're showing here, but our best guess at this moment is that it probably won't be. Well, we don't have the confidence that it necessarily will be. Understanding that when we're increasing bitumen production, we're adding material to material that's being added. Whereas on the oil side, we're increasing new production based on declining old production. And so it's difficult to build up on a platform that's sinking beneath you. But should it turn out to be the case, then we would see more of the crude oil leaving the province. However, it is still going to be oil sands, bitumen. We will see less natural gas being available for removal because we're producing less of it, and part of that material that we are producing is going to be utilized in Alberta. So less is available for removal. Looking in the longer term, we really are talking about the unconventional-conventional split. So the majority of Alberta's conventional oil and gas has been produced. We are about 90% depleted at the moment, but that's only with the oil that we've currently identified. We will be identifying more oil and more gas as more work is done to drill. But for the most part, because we're in a mature basin, it's an ever decreasing slice of pie. So if you look at the shale oil or the tight oil or the shale gas, we would need those materials or the commodities from those areas just to replace the material that we're losing. So just to stay even, we need some of that material. The regulator is always interested about the future, so one of the things that we've done recently is released a report in 2012 on the shale hydrocarbons within the province, a first look at what might be out there. And we generated a table that we've reproduced in ST98, which has some very large numbers in it, significantly large numbers. But again, there's a significant difference between the material that's in place in the ground and the material that you can commercially extract. So on a go-forward basis, most of what you saw in those last slides is still rooted on the conventional side. If there's going to be a change to that picture with a greater input of the unconventional side, it is likely to happen in the last part, the last 5 years of that analysis, and then increasingly ever so beyond that period of time. So this is just, went through the shale report, looked at the key formations they had listed, and sort of highlighted the richest areas from those reports, from each of those formations. And those are the areas that we would anticipate seeing development. So not that we can't see unconventional development outside of that area, but we would just assume that on our ability to gaze into the crystal ball at this point, that the development is likely to take place on the inside. You will know from the first slide, though, that there's lots of oil and gas in the province. So we will continue to see oil and gas development outside of those circles. As a matter of fact, it's only that black circle up at the top is the only place in the province where we wouldn't anticipate oil and gas activity on a go-forward basis. One part is Wood Buffalo National Park, and the other part is the Precambrian Shield, where we wouldn't anticipate having any anyway. So everywhere else, we would still consider seeing development take place. And most of that development is likely to be gas-related when the prices recover, because the basin is essentially a gas-prone basin more so than an oil-prone basin. So we need to have a little look to finish off outside of Alberta. So some of the things that might influence what happens inside Alberta are the creation or otherwise of 2 or 3 liquid petroleum or liquefied natural gas facilities on the west coast for potential shipment. And there's also been recent strikes, and there's a series of these offshore Newfoundland, which could be a significant player of conventional oil. Should that development, that might have an impact on us as well. If we look outside, starting with the U.S., this picture here, and I know you can't see the details, but hopefully you can still see the red arrow. That's American oil production. Their oil production is now back to about 1990 levels. The second one here is their gas production, again increasing in recent times, and it's basically at an all-time high. Now, the United States is our #1 Canadian export market. So what happens there has some influence on what happens on us. But that's just not the only place. Russia is the largest oil and gas producer. It continues to develop, and it is closer to Asia than we are, and the Asian market is where we're hoping to get into. The Russian market, either through the Arctic or through pipelines or through trains, has an advantage on transportation distances. That may have some impact on us. Other areas, increased oil production, there's Venezuela, there's offshore Norway, and there's also offshore Brazil. So Brazil has found significant deposits of oil offshore. Now it's expensive and it's difficult to produce, but that could have a significant play on us. But of all of that, Alberta has world-class resources. It has a mature industry, and it has steady regulatory processes. So going forward, we would still anticipate Alberta being one of the major players in the world. And I know the questions will come at the end, so I should actually say thank you. But what I'd like to say is that, Alberta, from that first slide you saw, sits on a huge treasure chest. And it behooves all of us to be involved to make sure that treasure is developed responsibly. Because at the end of the day, while we'll be producing this material for a significant part of time into the future, it will not last forever. And there's other things that we value as well. Thank you very much.